Hello and welcome to the first AXSChat of 2019. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Joanna Bryson today. Joanna is a reader in computer science at the University of Bath and has some really interesting things to say about robotics and artificial intelligence. These are things that we think and we know are going to shape the future of inclusive technology, but they're also going to have a profound impact on society in general. So welcome, Joanna. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work and and in particular, we can start the conversation about the impact of AI on inclusion.
Sure. Well, I guess I should say hi. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I guess I'm an academic and I work in the area of trying to understand intelligence generally. So my first and third degrees were basically psychology, but the scientific end of psychology. And then the second and fourth degrees were artificial intelligence. And that was because I was a good programmer and I knew it was one of my strengths, and I wanted to get into a good school, but also that I actually secretly was really interested in intelligence. So, I wound up doing a PhD at MIT. So my strategy worked, but it was kind of again, for a psychologist going into computer science at MIT was a bit overwhelming. And so what I did my PhD on was actually the systems engineering of AI, because I had been a professional programmer. So what is systems engineering? It's about how do you actually build things and make sure that it works, make sure that it's safe. How can you document accountability, things like that. So systems engineering is a big deal in computer science in general, and actually in all kinds of building. I mean, it predates computer science. However, it hasn't been a big enough deal in AI because people expect AI to program itself like kids do. Well, actually, no kid programs themselves. All right. There's like 4 billion years of biological stuff that sets them up at a place where they can learn. And then anybody who's a parent knows there's a lot of other time put in, but people are somehow oblivious of this. And so anyway, it was a wide open field, and it still is, unfortunately. There's still not enough people really working in systems engineering of AI and calling it that. Actually, everybody who works in systems engineering in computer science is, of course, aware of AI and has been incorporating AI techniques for decades. But anyway, so that's what I was doing for my PhD. What I actually was concerned about was understanding really blue sky questions about what is intelligence, what is cognition, why do some species use it more than others, why do some individuals use it more than others in different contexts, and these kinds of things. And then and while I was working on these sort of two things, I kept the engineering thing going, partly so I could keep doing my own work and have better tools, but also because I was in a computer science department, I had to sort of legitimize that. Well, actually, starting back in my PhD, I was at one point working on a robot that was shaped like a person and didn't work at all. It wasn't even plugged in. And people would walk up and say, oh, real ethical obligations to that robot. It would be wrong to unplug it. And I'm like, well, it's not plugged in. And then they'd be like, well, if you plugged it in. And I'd be like, well, it doesn't work. And I couldn't understand why people thought they had obligations to the robot, this particular robot. I was in a room full of robots that really did work, like older robots that had already, their projects were over. And it was the robot that was shaped like a person that people thought just that shape indicated that they had obligations to it. So I think there's a huge thing in here. Most, but not all people in human rights feel, as I do, that this is a huge indication of a misunderstanding of what it is that deserves ethical concern, right? But some people feel really strongly that I don't get it, and that of course intelligence is the magic bit that deserves attention. So I don't know if I should go on at greater length about that, or if you want to talk about that in Q&A. But basically, trust me, there's all kinds of intelligent things that we don't care very much about, like rats, like calculators, and it is the ones that remind us of being human that we somehow just then attribute intelligence to. Or not just intelligence, but also humanness, and therefore what's called moral patiency, obligations, ethical obligations.
I think that's really interesting because there are food sources, things that we eat that are more intelligent than the robots we've created right now, and whilst some people get very have grave concerns about this, and obviously there's the whole vegan movement and animal rights. A lot of other people couldn't care, and yet this whole anthropomorphization of robotics then causes us to focus and care about something that really doesn't have that much of intelligence at all. I think that's really interesting.
It's really important. Well, again, what is intelligence? Let's go there in a second. But I do want to say, dehumanizing is the flip side of anthropomorphizing. So as soon as you're saying that this robot is more human than, I don't know, a rat or something, then you're sort of rejecting part of the human experience, because the rat has more of the phenomenological experience, like pain and things like that, right? I was going to say about the intelligence, right? I actually don't have, I mean, there's lots of different components to intelligence. And so, books have better memory than we do. If they're written on decent paper, they'll last longer than 100 years, right? Google search, or any search, even Bing search, knows way more than any individual human, right? Your calculator can do math faster than you. Your phone can probably play chess better than you, unless you're some incredible chess player. What does it mean that the robots aren't intelligent? Again, it's not the intelligence that's the thing that makes ethical obligation. So this is hugely controversial. The question is, what is it then? One thing might be that it's irreplaceable, right? Each person is unique, whereas if we are careful with our phones, we can back them up, and so it doesn't matter so much. If you lose a phone that isn't backed up, then that's a problem. You've lost a bunch of information. Maybe it's important information about your relationships or somebody else's medical records. I met a doctor who lost their phone once, that kind of problem. But I would say then it's not so much that we owed an obligation to the phone as that the person whose phone it was had an obligation to their own memory that they should have been backing up their phone, right?
Wow.
But so that's the kind of confusion we can get into. Yeah.
Right. And first of all, I just want to applaud that you're a woman in technology. So yay. I love meeting brilliant women that are really changing the world. But and we were talking before the show, and you brought up some really good points that I want you to bring up during the show too. But we talk a lot on AXSChat about, and I also have another program called Human Potential at Work. What does it even mean to be human? So now we're often talking about the empowerment of people with disabilities, and sometimes people born or acquiring disabilities in their life, different disabilities, society will look down and say, I've had people say, oh, the worst thing that could ever happen to me is if I went blind. And I'm like, well, really? That's the worst thing? Are you sure? Yeah. Anyway, so do we even know? So when you're talking about intelligence, what does that mean to humanness? And am I combining things? And I know we're just figuring this all out as society, but how do the two work together? What does it mean to be human? Like the example that you and Neil were talking about with the rat, we know the rat has a lot of, that's why we do scientific experiments on rats, because we can make assumptions about human beings. But how can we tie those two together?
Yeah, no, so part of what science is about, this is such a great set of questions, but we could literally spend like an entire degree talking about these questions. Part of what science is about is understanding what kinds of things there are in the world. In fact, that's also philosophy. It's called ontology, right? It's finding out what kinds of things are in the world. And so sometimes the words that we were using turn out not to be adequate. So let me give you a simple example in contemporary European languages. In English, we have two words, conscious and conscience. So conscious is sort of awake and aware. Conscience is telling you what's right or wrong. In Italian, there's only one word for both of those, and it necessarily has religious overtones. Okay, so it's like the concepts are broken up different. Okay, intelligent, a lot of people use intelligent to mean human-like, and they assume that there's all these things that come along with it. But if I use the word intelligent as I was told actually in my degrees, both my undergraduate degree in psychology and my master's degree in artificial intelligence, I was told, look, intelligence is being able to do something appropriate in a context. So being able to perceive a context and respond to it, either to deal with opportunities and threats. Okay, that's a definition we've had for like 150 years. And it's pretty clear. You can see which animals are more able to adjust to new challenges, right? So the people will tell you, we don't understand what intelligence is, okay? That doesn't make sense. Intelligence is a word, and we choose some subset of things to define, all right? And I just gave you a perfectly good working definition that we've used for 150 years. If people tell you, I don't even know, no one knows what intelligence is, therefore AI is impossible, what they're really saying is, I'm afraid that you're going to challenge what it means to be human. I think of intelligent as meaning human-like, and I refuse to allow you to make a machine that challenges who I am. All right?
Wow.
To be blunt.
Good.
Okay.
Wow.
So,
Bravo.
So I think there is a big issue about what is it to be human, and especially, I mean, when you think of really severe disabilities, and when people are making decisions like end of life decisions and things like that, there's huge questions, and I do some moral philosophy, but I'm not a trained moral philosopher. I can't go all the way down. But I can tell you that I have a really interesting, different perspective than most people who talk about this with respect to AI. Because of what I just told you, because I understand intelligence is just a trait, I can say, look, we have all these intelligent things. Some of them are artifacts. What does it mean to be AI? It's you're intelligent and you're an artifact. Okay, and I shouldn't say you in this context, actually. So there's something that what does it mean to be an artifact? It means it was deliberately built, okay? And so rather than saying that it's impossible to have artificial intelligence you have obligations to, I say it's a bad idea to build artificial intelligence we have obligations to. Because obligations are a way that humans have figured out how to coordinate our actions. And as you just mentioned, it is super hard to figure out how much obligation we have to each other. So why complicate that by creating machines that need obligations? We can say, look, if this is a legitimate commercial product, then it has to be backed up, right? For example, right? It has to be replaceable. It has to be mass produced. Otherwise, we would be in a situation where we might have to choose between saving the robot and saving the child. And I think it's a completely legitimate thing that we should demand from our robot makers, that we should have to make that choice. That the robot only costs money, but otherwise it's completely replicable. Now, of course, some people will make art that is robots, but that's just the same as a painting. Again, that's an individual one-off thing that you have other issues with, which are the same as art. Okay.
I know Antonio has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
You were talking about the phone being backed up. Today, we don't need an agenda. We don't need to memorize like we had to do in the past as many numbers. So the phone itself has become a device of assistive technology, in a certain way. So how when you have the chance of talking with very smart people, a lot of smart people around the world working in this field and debating this type of topic, how do you see upcoming technology being able to help individuals, in this case, individuals with disabilities, and somehow also empower and amplify our own senses, where we can use technology not only to be more efficient, but also to be part of the community, to be able to communicate.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Again, at the extremes of this question, we're going to get into an area which I am aware of but not an expert in, which is human enhancement. So a lot of people are more comfortable with using technology to bring people up to some norm than to push them beyond that norm. I have to say personally, and I only found out this recently, when my vision is corrected, as it is when I have glasses on, I actually have better than average vision, right? So I didn't realize I was one of those people that was being corrected above the norm, but that was just because my main problem was an astigmatism. So it's either way below norm or somewhat above norm, okay? So that's just an example of that. I'm not sure that that makes sense to talk about, cutting off at some line of where you can bring people up to. But having said that, let's pull back into my comfort zone, which is that there's no question artificial intelligence is massively enabling. I mean, I've read, I haven't had the experience, of course, but I've read people talking about how amazing it is to take their phone out and somebody who was, say, blind from birth, and suddenly for the first time they go outside and they can tell that it's a sunny day and what color the sky is, whether it's blue or gray. And they feel so much more a part of human society, which is wonderful. That's great. And certainly for me, I'm not very good with languages, but I'm no longer afraid to just walk into somewhere and we'll make it. If we have a phone and we have signal, then we're gonna be able to communicate. And similarly, that I'm not afraid of getting lost in cities, and I might take mobile, public transportation sooner than I would have otherwise. All kinds of things that might be good for the ecosystem. At the same time, will it make everybody the same? Well, there's two problems there, and this is, I think, that conversation you mentioned from before that you want me to bring back. One is that it's however wonderful it is to be a part of humanity and know that it's sunny or not, it's not the same as actually seeing everything. That you don't, as I said, when I have my glasses on, I see a little more than the average person, right? We just don't all have the same amount of information we get when we go outside, all right? But secondly, there are cases where artificial intelligence of various kinds are bringing us all to the same level, and what that does is actually reduce wage differentiation. Now, I just made a big jump into how much you get rewarded for doing your job. And you might think, Marx said that everybody having the same wage if they put forward the same effort is an ideal, right? But let me give you the case that we were talking about before. This is the case about truck drivers. So some people say, don't be afraid of driverless cars, because actually there aren't enough drivers now. We can't find enough people to drive trucks right now. They're all the people who still do it are old and they're retiring and nobody wants the job. Okay, well, but what's really going on there is that in the 1970s, corrected for inflation, truck drivers made 50% more money than they do now. And why is that? Well, again, if you're thinking AI as a human, then you won't think this is AI. But there's this thing called power steering. And if you believed my definition I gave earlier, that you're transferring, you're recognizing the context of the steering wheel and then transferring that into changing where the wheels are going. It used to be a physical process. Now it's done by automation. All right. So now it used to be that to be a truck driver, you had to be a very strong individual. It was mostly men, occasionally women, but it was big, strong individuals who were also smart enough to be able to schedule their time and good with maths. Not everybody is good with maths. Now you can have spreadsheets, you can have GPS, and basically a lot more people can drive, which is great. It's enabling, but it means that job is no longer a high-paying job. All right. And so there's some really interesting questions about redistribution when we use technology to make everybody more equal. Of course, it's better than the people who couldn't drive at all if they couldn't find any job, I suppose. But these are very complex questions of political economy. And I'm starting to move into trying to learn that area, but it's very complicated. And my feeling is that nobody's really sure what's going on with wages. As far as I can tell.
That you touch a very interesting point, and going back to the truck drivers, because today we see a large number of articles talking about the future of jobs and how many jobs are going to be lost. But this is something that has been happening in the last 50 years. Yeah. It is not something So how do we bring this to reality? And this is something that is happening now. This is not about the future. What are our views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, this over-identification with intelligence means that people didn't recognize artificial intelligence until it got good at things that we really feel is very human, like face recognition, eye contact, and language, spoken language. I think that's why suddenly, because we've just recently got good at uploading that, those human abilities into machines, now people feel like, oh, AI is here. But it's been here for a long time. Automation has, and we can look at the patterns of what happens when you bring automation in. And generally, everybody is better off. If you look on average, I mean, not everybody, but even at the very poor, even in America, where we have terrible healthcare, in terms of, we have great healthcare at the top, but terrible payment across the bottom. But even in America, over the last 20 years, the very poor have gotten better healthcare. Globally, we've seen extreme poverty, like 4 billion people move out of extreme poverty in the last 15 years. And a lot of that is to do with actually with mobile phones. I mean, AI is only part of the information communication technology revolution, but it helps you access all that information. Anyway, if you're a person living in a small village in the middle of literally nowhere, having access to what is the weather tending to do, how much will you get paid for things? I'm sorry, we got to suspend that.
Speaking of technology.
Yeah, speaking of technology. Sorry, I hope you guys can edit. Okay. So,
no, but we all get it.
Yeah, I'll have that happen. I'm sorry about that. Going back to, where was I?
The villager with a mobile phone wanting to know about the weather.
Yeah. They can know they basically can find out what products to grow and what a fair price is. And that changes a lot, Mm-hmm. And so technology has helped a lot of people. You can look at very basic things like infant mortality. And in most countries, infant mortality is dropping. Unfortunately, not right now in America. But that's probably political, not technological. So the infant mortality is a basic thing to human happiness. We really want babies to be alive, and it's one of the best predictors of government failures if state failures if infant mortality starts increasing. So on these we know that we get more wealth, but we also know that we have periods of genocide, right? So it's not like it's simple. And a lot of it is political.
A comment to some of the stuff you were saying, Joanna. I know that I was having a conversation with someone that Neil and Antonio introduced me to, Maylin, and she's just this brilliant woman. And she was telling me that the United Nations used to go in, or the Red Cross, or anybody going in to help people that were in trouble for whatever reason. And they would say, what do you need? What can we do to help you? And they would say, well, we need water, we need clean food, we need clothing. Now when they go in and say, what can we do to help? They're saying we need Wi-Fi. We need the internet. We need, because a lot of them, even as refugees and stuff, they will have the devices. They need the devices to get themselves out of the situation. And that's very empowering and very hopeful. But there's so much misunderstanding about artificial intelligence. And I was looking at, the other day I was on Twitter, and this man said, somebody that I don't know, but he just made a comment that he was no longer supportive of driverless cars because of the driverless cars, people looking at AI, they just were totally ignoring the mental health aspects of it. And I thought, oh gosh, I could go in my brain a million places with that, but I was curious where he was going with that, and he couldn't really elaborate on it. And I also think it's interesting, Joanna, you have all these wonderful degrees, and you're obviously a very brilliant woman and you're saying, I've been taught intelligence means this. But what you're also saying is, that's what we thought. That's what the experts thought, but there's a lot of it that's still, once again, what does it mean to be truly human? There's so much happening right now, and then on top of it, we're doing the artificial intelligence and the narrow AI, and it's the intensity of it all is pretty overwhelming. And
you're
so
going down so many directions there.
Yeah, well, I know, because that's what's happening. We're all going in so many directions.
Let me so I don't let me forget to come back to the mental health and driverless cars, that part, but let me say quickly again, when you say the point I was trying to make about intelligence, and also both the word intelligence and also AI, is that some of these things are just tools that we use and we construct. And so arguing about the real definition of intelligence is not a good thing to do. All right? There isn't any one definition. Words are used differently at different times and by different people. You use a definition to have a conversation, and you need to fix it for the beginning of that conversation. But you don't necessarily say, now all of the world is going to use the word that way. That's not the point. So you need to discriminate between the tools that you're using and then the effects you're trying to have, the conversations you're trying to have. So deciding, which people are you going to help? Hopefully all of them, but which people need how much help? Those kinds of questions. I would say those are the fundamental questions. And then you use, tools like AI and the word intelligence in the way that is most useful to achieve your fundamental goals. Okay. All right. So I'm going to come back first to the driverless car thing and the mental health. We mentioned a little bit earlier about the fact that, people say, humans will always be the creative ones with relationships or whatever. But in fact, taxi drivers are, again, hating their jobs now because they don't get to use the creativity that used to make them unique. They aren't the best navigators. The GPS or even the customers with their phones being annoying is telling them, what is the best way to get wherever? What is the most efficient way? Where are there accidents right now? They no longer get to use their minds as much. So there's a mental health aspect there that might have been what they said. But I wanted to tell you that just one of the few real big arguments I've had with somebody, I can't say it's a few arguments I've had on the internet, but the few arguments I've had over disabilities. Somebody was very angry with me because I was just saying as a fact, I was just stating that we will not allow driverless cars on our roads until they have significantly lower accidents than humans do. Now, that's just an observation of what all the governments are saying. It's how it is. So, for example, with adoption, that you have higher criteria of being a parent by adoption than by, by normal biology. And it's because when the state becomes responsible, they have higher cost to accountability. So that's why they have to have that kind of margin that helps them. Okay, somebody got really angry with me for just stating a fact, thinking that it was what I was saying should happen. And they were saying that that I wasn't being sufficiently sensitive to the needs of the disabled who need these driverless cars, so they can be independent. And this is a really interesting question, because is the driverless car ever going to be cheaper than hiring a human and a conventional car, right? What is this meaning of need? So there was this very strong belief that, and I understand it. I understand not wanting to feel obliged to people. People are special. So I understand this, and I learned this as a roboticist, right? There are people that will use the most awful robots to help them, drink beer, because it's so nice to be able to drink beer, even if it's really slow, without having to say thank you after every sip, the people that are paraplegic. So I get that. But I also just think that there's a pragmatic economic side of this and legal side that sometimes, again, this is about negotiations. Artificial intelligence in some ways isn't really changing anything. It's bringing technology closer to stuff that the fundamental problems we already had that maybe we weren't aware of before. And you just see a lot of engineers suddenly finding out about, the field of political economy or the field of moral philosophy, right? Those things were there and people argued about them for centuries, millennia. but it wasn't something with a computer science degree you necessarily needed to know.
I think that's fascinating. You talked a bit earlier about phones, and objects being things that should be replaceable, and you would back them up. Now,
Yeah.
I'm really interested because we covered some of this kind of these topics before in some of the discussions we'd had within our scientific community at work, and we were looking at things like transhumanism. And I'm interested in what your views are around sort of the Ray Kurzweil, for example, is a big proponent of singularity and backing himself up to the internet. And at what point, once you've backed up your brain, I don't think it's possible yet, because it's not possible to back up all of your experiences and your sort of chemical reactions that go into your body and your physiological stuff. But at what point does your humanity become digitized? Where is that crossover point, and what does that mean for us?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. So everything we've talked about up to this point was basically facts, or at least what I was talking about were basically facts. Now I have to go. When you have science, you have descriptive things. So you have to be based in evidence in the world, right? Something that's testable. When we talk about things like what is it to be human? It turns out there isn't a scientific fact of that. That is a normative thing. That is something that we negotiate with each other. So now I'm going to answer your question. I know we're getting towards the end anyway, so I will answer your question because more philosophically. So this is not to make a negative, but just saying this is something I can't prove, but it's my recommendation. I think that there is something very essential to our intelligence, that basically everything that we care about is that we're consciously aware of is stuff that helps a bunch of apes stay alive on this planet, right? There's a lot of things that are grounded in our physical experiences. Our desire to live forever is part of our being alive, right? That's part of the project of life, right? And so we're different in that we're aware of, we have stories about our drive for life, but you can see, bacteria drive for life, right? So it's part of that whole program. If you aren't, I'm not going to go into theology here. If you are, you'll have a different set of answers. But I don't think that there's a lot of coherence you can get, and I really worry about the consequences because, sorry, I'll finish that sentence. I really worry about the consequences of people believing that they can upload themselves into computers. And now, to some extent, it is great when you write your book and your book is going to survive you. Maybe people read it thousands of years from now, and that's some kind of achievement. And that is some part of your intelligence, and it is some part of your experience that's been put out there, and you feel like that's a great achievement. Other people think it's a more important achievement to make some people happy in their own family today, right? And you can have those discussions about how you want to allocate your resources. But when people think that a computer image of themselves really is them, I think this opens the door for all kinds of corruption. And I really worry about the consequences. I think it's really important. Life has found it very important that we keep making new individuals, and we replace the old with the new. And it is painful, but it's also wonderful. Again, we find joy in infants and things like that, and in the passing on. What I really worry about is, people leaving a lot of money or power to like bad AI images of themselves because they don't want to die, or just because they continue enjoying the exercise of power. We already have people that write wills that say, if my wife remarries, she loses all the money. They're wanting to execute power over their family, continue bullying their family or whatever after they die, right? So that's something that makes them feel more secure, right? I really, really worry about AI being used that way. I think it's fallacious to think that we can just be reduced to pure code, and that have even our somewhat or extremely compromised physical experience of being human, I think is part of the essential part of being human. But again, like I said, this is philosophy, this is normative, and some people feel very strongly that I'm wrong. But I going back to the facts, I do think it's a fact that people will exploit each other and tell each other that this is really you, and try to get your money for this you. Sorry, different kind of EU. EYOU.
Yeah.
I think that is a real concern. And so what I actually wrote a paper in 2017 with a couple of legal scholars called By, For, and Of the People, or Of, For, and By the People, I've forgotten. Anyway, I should know my Lincoln, but the legal lacuna of synthetic legal personhood. So we've made very strong recommendations that strictly AI systems should not be made into legal persons because of this corruption, this potential for corruption. It's basically AI could be the ultimate shell company, because you're not going to dissuade it when you can make infinite copies of it, right?
Oh wow, Antonio, I know you have got a comment.
Yeah. Joanna, you have touched different areas from religion to engineering to social sciences. Now, today, we have many organizations trying to develop systems and bring AI, in a more commercial way and sell services. How do you see the importance of the teams who are building all these systems? How diverse they need to be to bring all these different perspectives to the way how they build systems, how they build things?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I need to say that I personally am atheist, but I've been really impressed by a few, not everybody, but theologians that I've worked with on panels who really saw how they were used to studying the flow of power through human society, and they really saw those points I was just recently making about how different organizations are using people's fears and desires for eternal life and things to do smoke and mirrors, right? So I guess it should be that theologians should be very aware of that kind of thing. All we can do is work for diversity. The University of Bath is trying to put together a center of doctoral training that is interdisciplinary, and I know other organizations are doing that too. Certainly, that's part of the reason I do this kind of thing, and a lot of people are aware that they need to put together panels that come from a lot of different backgrounds. But personally, I will make a recommendation, a slightly risky recommendation, but certainly for me, having a psychology first degree and then artificial intelligence second and third degrees, well, second and fourth. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point, psychology, everything is about being able to understand people. And I had liberal arts, actually, so it was only sort of 2 years of psychology and 2 years of everything, humanities, physics, whatever. So we're getting this again, I'm sorry. All right, I have no idea what's going on. I'm sorry. Let me.
It's okay. It's just Ray Kurzweil telling you that he's ready.
Yeah, no, the next meeting was at 11, so we've run over. That's the problem.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so we have to finish. So I hope if you have more questions along those lines, ask me next week.
No, that's grand. I just want to say it's been great to have you on. It's been a fantastic conversation. I need to thank Barclays and MyClearText for continuing to support us and keep us going. Thank you very much, Joanna. We look forward to you joining us on Twitter.
Yes. Okay, see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I better go and answer that other call. It was my next call, so next meeting.
And send us some sample questions, okay?
Well, why don't you guys come up with something right now, and then I'll weigh in on it. So send me I think I mentioned a few there, but yeah. Okay. All right. See you.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.